Anyone who's ever done anything worth doing has dreamed big, failed mightily, and mostly started from humble beginnings. This is a podcast about such people. The most fascinating podcast in the world is fascinating because of the stories of the human beings. Hello, everybody. It's Pat DeCerbo, the most fascinating podcast in the world. Nothing to do with me. It's all about the people that are on the show. And Dan Crimmins, you, in my opinion, are a fascinating human being.
Thank you.
I thought I'd tell this story about how we met right off the bat. I was having lunch in a restaurant in Philadelphia with my friend Jared Green, and Dan was our server at the restaurant. And Jared and I were talking about the concept of ostracism and how cruel a thing ostracism is in a society. And I said, that's why Socrates drank the hemlock. And I said, was it Socrates or Plato? And Dan said, it was Socrates. And I looked up. I said, that was an unexpected source of the answer. And there you have it. I knew there was a lot more to Dan, and we got talking, and he is a fascinating person. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. So we've talked in the past a little bit,
hmm
but for the benefit of others, what are your earliest memories? Like, what do you remember as a small child?
Um, the earliest thing I can remember is the house we were in Oregon, and just the views. It was a duplex in Tillamook, right on the coast, and we'd look out onto the ocean. Uh, we would see whales a couple times a year out in the distance. There were sea lions and stuff on the beach. It was a really weird, idyllic setting. I have vivid memories of just greenery and the pine forest out there.
Sounds beautiful.
It was a nice place to start one's life. Yeah,
And subsequent to that, where did you all, where did you move after that?
we moved around a lot. My dad was chasing opportunity. We moved from Oregon to Los Angeles, from LA to Melbourne, Florida. Then we moved to Chichester in PA. Ended up settling down in Delaware. Did middle school, high school in Delaware. Uh, Went to moved to Wilmington, Delaware. Started my college career. Did a year in art school. Didn't go super well. Kind of lacked the discipline. Uh, Transferred over to University of Delaware. And then 9/11 happened, and I enlisted. Went from Was in Fort Benning for my basic training. Did a year in Korea, and then went back to Fort Benning with the Third ID, Third Infantry Division, Third Brigade. Did 2 tours of Iraq with them. Uh, when that was over, I moved back to Delaware. Wanted to graduate from UD. So went back, got my degree, uh, had a couple of really rough years, and then I
Hmm.
ended up in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
Love it up
What do you
here.
remember about college before you enlisted?
It's a bit of a haze. Um, I uh, I drank way too much. It was kind of that sort of freedom was new to me, and I didn't have a lot of coping skills at the time.
Hmm.
So it was yeah, a lot of binge drinking, a lot of moderate drug use, um, a lot of missed classes. I definitely squandered the opportunity the first time. I didn't do the right thing. Had a
Hmm.
lot of fun. Um, you know, there was a tight knit group of us. As happens in Delaware, a lot of kids from my high school that I was close with. We ended up at University of Delaware, and it was kind of 13th through 16th grade.
Mm.
And then for a lot of people of in my age range, 9/11 was a big deal, and the that day, impacted everybody. It For me we were living in a resident advisor's room, a large room, 3 bedrooms. There was a kitchen in there, a little common area. We had, I think, 5 televisions set up. The idea being, we're going to watch sports,
Mm.
basketball season, we're going to have every game on. So I woke up, I was hungover, I slept in, and I came out into the common room, and the whole floor was in there watching 9/11 on 5 different TVs.
Mm.
And the type of kid I was, I reacted to things strongly just as a matter of course. And this was novel, you know. Uh, I kind of decided that day that there were going to be consequences for this, and everybody was framing it as an act of war. And I think sometimes we forget how fuzzy and unclear everything was back then.
Mm.
So I made the decision because I was failing out of college. I didn't have a lot going on. I was adrift when I was in school. There's this narrative, that things are supposed to go a certain kind of way. And for me, college, it wasn't even a consideration. It was just a thing. Yeah, you're going to go to school. That's how this is going to work. Sorry, should have set this up better. Um, I had a relationship, a high school relationship end that at the time I thought was going to be it. Like I thought, oh, I'm going to marry this girl at 17, which a lot of people feel that way, but it's unrealistic. And when we broke up, I didn't respond well. Um, I went into a deep depression, and I tried to that didn't help with the drinking, because I really put a lot of stock in this relationship, and I was very immature. Um, when 9/11 happened, I thought this would be my chance to prove it because I'd convinced myself that part of the reason we broke up was that I wasn't tough enough, I
Mm.
wasn't masculine enough, and this is couldn't have been further from the truth. But I was in my early 20s, and it fit. I made it make sense in my head. When 9/11 happened, I felt like, okay, this is going to be a war, and I thought it was going to be. I didn't have a proper expectation of what war was. It was based on media. It was based on history books. Um, and I didn't really have a sense of what modern warfare was going to be like, and I don't think anybody really did. Um, so I was envisioning a war between nations, and I was envisioning a draft, and I was envisioning a long process, though not as long as it actually turned out to be. I thought that if I enlist and there's a draft, my brother gets skipped, right? I don't know how accurate that is, but that's what I had in my head. I was also uh, I was suicidal. I really wanted it to be over, and I thought that if I enlist, this is a way where I can. Nobody's going to ask any questions if I get killed this way, and my parents won't have to deal with that, and there will be some monetary benefit. And I uh, wanted revenge. You know, uh,
Did you feel like you might get the girl back
I
if
did.
you were?
I
Hmm.
really did. I thought that like I would come back from basic training and be in much better shape. And oh wow, he did something. Yeah, that was definitely a thought in my head, a thing I entertained for a long time.
Mm.
Um, in my mid 30s, I was diagnosed as being on autism spectrum, and that made a lot of sense. Like at first, I rejected it, like, no, that's not me. But then I looked back and really, did some reading about it. It's like, oh yeah, no, that fits. So I really like I put a lot into that relationship. A lot of I put all my eggs in that basket, and I was bad at being in a relationship. I wasn't a good partner because I was. We broke up when I was 19. You know,
Mm.
I was 19 years old. I don't think there is such a thing as a great partner at 19. You're learning
Mm.
still. Um, but yeah, I definitely had the thought that at first, like, oh, I'll get her back this way, and then if not her, somebody, and then maybe it won't matter because I'm probably not going to make it.
Hmm.
That was my mindset. Um, I was I didn't have a developed moral or like political identity. I was kind of taking everything at face value. I still remember W. Bush's speech on that pile of rubble, and that moment was very inspiring. And I was angry, and I was scared, and I felt like I had to do something. I wasn't going to graduate. My GPA was very low. Um, so I decided that I was going to do this, and then my friends were like, "No, you're not going to follow through," because it was very out of character for me.
Hmm.
I was in my libertarian phase back then, but I was still. I've never been much of a joiner. I've never been particularly good at following instructions, and I have a troubling habit of questioning everything, which is not. It's not. It's not what they look for in a soldier. You're supposed to get on board. Um, so when everybody said, "No, you're not going to do it. This isn't you," I was like, "Oh, I'll show you."
Hmm.
And I did, and they were right. It wasn't for me. I really shouldn't. I wasn't cut out for it, and because I didn't understand what I was going to be asked to do.
Mm-hmm. So you did your basic training. You said Fort Benning,
Yes, sir.
and then what happened?
Um, so I was assigned to Korea. Uh, I I got done basic. I had a month back at home before I went over to Korea. Got there, and Korea was a huge culture shock. Um, I we moved around a lot, but I had never been that far away from everything, and I had never been that completely alone. Um,
How
so
do you
March of
mean?
that, I have always, up to that point, I had been pretty close with my family, um, and my friends were young men I'd been hanging out with since middle school. Um, People who knew me, uh, people who I knew, and now I'm on literally the other side of the planet. And one of the things I will say about the Army, positive, it is a diverse group. You're uh, you're seeing kids from all over. Um, we were, mostly uh, working class, mostly poor kids, but not all. You got kids from all over the place. It was hard for me to adapt, especially when you're new in a unit. It's a difficult situation. Um, and then in March of that year, we invaded Iraq, and that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me then. And some of this is projection. Like I'm not looking back. It was why would we go into Iraq? They had nothing to do with anything. Um, it seemed weird to me that that was what was going on. So we were on a heightened footing. There was a lot of conflict in Korea. The U.S. Army in Korea, it's an occupying force still. It's more benevolent, but we're a foreign military stationed there. Uh, Tensions with North Korea are high, but tensions with the civilian population were also high. There was an incident where a U.S. convoy ended up striking two little girls inadvertently. I mean, it was an accident, but it was two children were killed because in Korea, to get from our bases to training areas, you're driving just on regular roads. Um, Imagine, you've got a convoy of Humvees and main battle tanks rolling down 95. We didn't stop for anything. We really we were above everything else. That was the mindset. And so there was this accident in Korea where two girls were killed, and people were very upset about it because children died so that these support vehicles could move around. Um, there was a court martial, and it was determined that standard operating procedure needed to change, but that the vehicle involved followed the procedure. They weren't going to be held liable, and people in Korea didn't like that. So there were a series of riots and demonstrations that we were called out to respond to. Um, it was a rough time. My year ended in Korea, and I went to 3rd Brigade, 3rd IG. And these were the guys that they led the push into Iraq for the Army. Um, they saw a lot of really heavy combat. Um, I trained with them for a year, and then we did our first tour, and it did not take long for me to sour on the whole experience. Um, I don't like hurting people.
Mm.
I don't. I don't enjoy it. Um, but I joined the infantry, so that's the job. And even when you weren't actively doing things, just seeing, you know, uh, the way people in Adwar were forced to live, it wasn't great. Before we got there, living under Hussein was not a good deal for most people. It wasn't the sort of situation I would want to live in. But when we got there, things had gotten out of control. The sectarian violence was it was bad. It was where we were was it was a town called Adwar. It's right on the Tigris River. Uh, that was a mostly Sunni city. It was the birthplace of Hussein. It was where they found him in the spider hole. So there was a lot of Ba'athist loyalists in there still, and a lot of Sunni militants. Just to our south was a little town called Mujama. Mujama was a mostly Shia village. There were Shia militants there, and there were killings and reprisals and a lot of a lot of violence among the local population. Then we're there adding fuel to the fire, right? Ostensibly, we were there to pacify, and most of our mission was prepping for the first election, and we were trying to impose a Western style democracy on this area, which has been divvied up and controlled with no regard to the reality on the ground for over 100 years. It didn't work well. Um, the things that we did, even as a matter of course, I mean, inside the rules of war, was heartbreaking business. Things we would. I'm the bad guy in a lot of kid stories, right? There's a lot of people in that country that we shattered their sense of security. We would go through their homes and rifle through their belongings, looking for weapons, looking for intelligence, but we didn't really know, right? We didn't know what we were looking for. If we found an AK-47, great. Um, but we would just, oh, these documents look like they might be important. We're going to take them. We're going to turn your house over. We're going to blow a hole in your wall in the middle of the night and take away all military age men. And I don't know what happened to those guys. You know, we had a bunker on our post that we would hold them in, and then they got sent to Liberty or Biop or Anaconda to be detained and interrogated. But I didn't know what happened to them, and we most of the Iraqis didn't want us there, right? And I can relate to that now. I wouldn't want to see foreign troops walking down my streets. Um, so my time in Iraq, I did 2 tours. It it weighed on me um, because I was doing things that felt wrong, that didn't make me feel good, that I was causing harm and a lot of it, and then I'm being told what a good job I'm doing. And I developed a pretty uh, moderate to severe case of PTSD. Um, when I got home, I had a real hard time fitting back in because when you're in the army, when you're in the infantry, we're taught that you need two things to solve any problem: initiative and violence of action. Right? If you don't have the initiative, you use violence of action to gain the initiative. Everything is a conflict. Um, you're supposed to be aggressive. You're supposed to be leaning forward all the time. And the old saying, every to a hammer, every problem is a nail. I had a real limited skill set on how to
Mm.
deal with things. And while I was in the army, it's not a good way to live. You're in the middle of nowhere. It's austere. And my second tour, we were in a literal hole in the ground for the first 8 weeks, and then we built up a fob. And after about 6 months, we got showers, and we were living kind of rough. We weren't, like we weren't out in tents. We weren't out, sleeping under the stars. But it was a hard way to live in the best situations. And then we're out, doing presence patrols, doing raids, doing snatch and grabs, uh, doing deliberate assaults. The I thought that when I got out, civilian life was going to be easy. Once there's nobody shooting at me, once there's nobody throwing hand grenades at us, once I am in charge of my own destiny and I get to decide where I go and where I live, everything's going to be great. Because if I made it through this, I've been told forever that's how soft civilians are and how much tougher and how much better we are. Once I get out, everything's going to be fine and I'm not going to be so depressed anymore and I'm not going to be so sad and I'm not going to be so anxious. And then I get out and wouldn't you know it, life is hard. Um, so I didn't necessarily cope very well. I'd gotten married. I met a girl between tours, and it was a tumultuous, toxic relationship from the beginning. Um, and we ended up married for 9 years, and it did not make things better. Um, I ended up uh, becoming more and more depressed, more and more sedentary, more and more isolated. I didn't really talk to anyone. Um, I became estranged from my parents. Uh, I gained a lot of weight. I
How
wasn't
much weight?
at my heaviest. I was like 370.
Mm.
Uh, it was. I was a big guy in the army. Like I wasn't. I was carrying some extra weight, and like my last tour, I think I was probably 215, 220 when I got out. Um, my last, the last like 10 months, I was battle NCO, training NCO. So I was on the radio most of the time. There was it was decided that maybe it was better that I didn't go out anymore, and I could type and I had these skills, so I was able to help better in that facility. Uh, but when I got home, it was really the only thing I felt like I had control over is what I ate, and even then, I didn't have a whole lot of control. And we didn't do a lot of cooking. It was fast food, uh, pretty much constantly. When we did cook, we're heating up dumplings. It wasn't my diet was terrible. I was drinking so much soda, uh, and I was just miserable waiting for it to be over. I things got darker and darker. We were my
Waiting
ex-wife and I
for what to be over the
life,
marriage or
the
life?
marriage
Okay.
life, anything. I was despondent. I was dissociative. I wasn't really sure what was real. I would have nightmares. I was always on guard. I carried a gun with me everywhere I went for like the first 6 months when I got out of the army, which is an insane thing to do. Um, but like you're conditioned. It was probably for 5, 6 years afterwards. I would periodically start and be like, "Where is my rifle?" Because and I still have that dream sometimes where like I can't find my fucking rifle, and I'm like, "Oh, sorry,
Mm.
I can't find my rifle. I'm missing some piece of gear. I don't know where I'm
Mm.
supposed to be." Um, Everything came to a head in, I guess, 2013. I ended up losing my job, um, and part of the reason why I was losing my job was because my ex-wife needed my attention all the time. There was always some tragedy, some disaster, something. She wasn't working. She had health issues, and I don't want to get too much in her. It wasn't great. It required a lot of my attention. When I lost the job, we were struggling for money anyway. Everything we made got spent immediately on nothing, like just wasting money on knickknacks, on whatever. She had a tendency to like get into hobbies, so like we spent probably $1,000 on like a sewing machine and fabric and threads and needles, and then 3 weeks later, none of it was getting used. Um, I was spending money on booze mostly, um, just whatever kind of things I could think of to distract myself. So when I lost the job, there was a suicide attempt.
Mm.
I was ready to shoot myself in the head uh, because I didn't see things getting better. I ended up going to an inpatient program uh, at Coatesville, the VA hospital up in PA, and
Mm-hmm.
that's when things really started to turn around for me, and I started to see things a little bit more clearly.
What do
Um,
you remember when you first got there?
the first thing is it was a you're locked in, right? So the first like 3 days you're in a crisis ward where they take your clothes, they take your phone, they take your shoelaces. You are under surveillance all the time, and you're
Because
stuck
of the suicide attempt?
because yeah, this was
Okay.
for people that were at imminent risk of suicide.
Okay.
So you're in there to get processed and observed for the first couple of days to make sure that you're not going to be an imminent threat to yourself. Then you move over to the other ward where you have your clothes back, you have your phone, but you're still locked in. The group was, as I recall, maybe there was 20 of us in there. Uh, a pretty even mix between Iraq War era and Vietnam era.
Mm-hmm.
And the Vietnam era guy stuck out to me because at first I was like, these guys have been home for decades and they're still dealing with this. But what I noticed was that everybody there was still very much identified with who they were when they were enlisted. Um, they were still wearing their 82nd Airborne shirts, their 5th Marine shirts. They were still wearing fatigues, uniform items. They were still wearing combat boots. They were still wearing what I call the moto hats, the motivational I served. Their identity was, it seemed to me, stuck back then, and I realized that things weren't just going to get better. That I was going to have to take effort. I was going to have to make changes. I was going to have to do something, and part of it was I had to make a choice. Did I want to stay in that mindset forever, or did I want to move forward? Um, so I decided I didn't want that to be me. I didn't want to be uh, near the end of my life, still racked with guilt, still beating myself up, not able to move past this one experience. Um, I got out of the facility and went back home, um, and I started looking for work. I had been a project manager. Uh,
But you were making a super important point. I feel like that
Yes,
you recognized something that was structural in the people around you and that was inhibiting people from growing. And I think that's a really important point in anyone's life if they want to make change. And
absolutely.
so I'm super interested in that.
Well, so it's part of the military indoctrination program is it's a fundamental reshaping of you as an individual, right? Um, every morning when I was in third ID, uh, in garrison before PT, we sang the Dog Face Soldier song. We sang the Division song, and it's this old '40s big band thing. Um, but one of the lines, and they've changed the line to make it more inclusive. But when I was in, the line was, "On all the posters I see, they say the army builds men. Now they're tearing me down to build me over again." And that's literally true. Um, you, what we ask soldiers to do, what we require soldiers to do, is inhuman. Um, the things that fighting a war, even if it was 100% necessary, even if your survival and the survival of your family depends on your participation, it is it's terrible. It is immoral. Jimmy Carter said that sometimes war is a necessary evil, but it is always necessary. And so to get a person to 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 perform and to survive in that environment requires a fundamental reshaping. Um, your there's training and there's conditioning, right? Training is conscious. Training is this is how you use this piece of equipment. This is in rifle marksmanship, right? Training is uh, sight picture, breath control, uh, trigger squeeze. Um, but conditioning is a psychological process to get you over the innate human uh, revulsion that comes from killing another person. Most people just can't do it, right, without a lot of conditioning. So, uh, George or General Marshall, after the Second World War, started looking at research as to what can we do to increase lethality, right? And just as a brief aside, it used to be that marksmanship training was done on a nice sunny day in PT gear in workout clothes, and there would be a target, a large target, like 500 meters distance, and it would come up, you would fire around, it would go down, and somebody would mark where your round hit and send it back up. And that's how you trained on a rifle. Um, they found that there was a wild disparity between marksmanship training and actual lethality in combat. Marshall's research found that if you had 100 infantrymen in contact with the enemy during the Second World War, no more than 20-25 of them would fire their weapons at all. Most of those other guys would find something else to do. They would run ammo, they would tend to wounded, they would spot on a crew served, that they would run messages, they wouldn't see a target, right? They would be looking and scanning, but not firing their weapons. Of the 20 to 25 that were firing their weapons, less than 4 or 5% were aiming down their weapons, identifying a human target, and trying to kill that person. Most people were just firing in the general direction. Um, if I remember correctly, it was something like 4 or 5% of pilots, combat pilots, are responsible for 90% of air-to-air kills in the Second World War. Why is this, right? What can we do to make our soldiers, what can we get to increase the fire rate? What can we do to increase lethality? Well, they changed the way we train, right? Now, and from like, but after the Second World War and until today, uh, when you're in the rifle range, you're in full kit. right? And for most infantry units, I don't know if they do this in the soft skill units, but the infantry units, we got, I mean, they just smoked us before we got on the range, right? We would do obstacle courses. We would do a forced march. We do a 12-mile march to the range, get our ammo, hop in, and start shooting, so that you're stressed, you're sweaty, your your heart rate is elevated, you're having trouble controlling your breathing. The same conditions you're going to face in combat. The targets are not round targets anymore. They're called Ivans. They are man-shaped targets that pop up, and when you hit them, they go back down. And they're only up for a couple seconds. If you can't get on target, they just fall anyway, right? Uh, you are stressed, right? Because that's how you're going to be when you're fighting. You are conditioned to see a human target and take it down. Then there's Skinnerian conditioning on top of that. If you do well on the range, you are praised and rewarded. If you do poorly, you are punished and demeaned. When you're not actively on the range, you're doing reflexive fire, where it's a drill where you face a target, they yell up, you bring your head up, you bring the rifle up, you fire 2 rounds, you come down, you turn to your left, you turn, raise, fire. You do this for hours. We would do shoot houses. We would do urban training where it just for hours you were uh, going through these houses. There would be man-shaped targets hanging from the ceiling with balloons behind them, right? So it's like there's a loop on the back of the target, 550 cord. There's a balloon tied up, and that's holding the target on the ground. And when you pop that balloon, it's going to fall. We would do force-on-force training with laser tag, basically called Miles gear. We would do simunitions, where you trade in your upper receiver for a new upper receiver. You get new magazines, and now you've got these 9mm rounds that are basically powder fired paintballs. So it hurts, right? And you're shooting at people, right? And when you get hit, you feel it. It's all these things to condition you to get over your aversion to committing violence to other people.
Right. So when you were meeting these people, so you're in the.
Yes, I'm going to say they had been conditioned. They had been brought in.
Mhm.
Their identity was mostly what the Army or Marine Corps had put into them. Um,
Mhm.
they were traumatized by their time in Iraq or Vietnam, and they didn't know how to deal with it. And the way a lot of them dealt with it was by doubling down and this is who I am, right? And so they couldn't make the steps to change their worldview, and so they were stuck. And this is my perspective. I don't know what was in their head, but this is how it seemed to me, and that's how I felt. I felt stuck. I felt like my time in service was the most interesting thing about me, and that was a big part of my identity. So I got home and I put away a bunch of stuff. I was still wearing my field jacket all the time. I put that away. I got rid of all my grunt style shirts. Um, I took the third ID patch off my dog's harness. Um, I I got my dog used to be set up like a military working dog. She had an OD harness, a big chunky leather collar. She looked like a tough dog. I'm like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I got her a bandana. I got her a fun collar. Um, then the biggest thing that happened when I got home, I was looking for work and I couldn't find it in the professional field. I couldn't find it as a project manager because I really shouldn't have gotten that job in the first place. It was a family friend had a building restoration company. Um, my dad was running the business for him, and he hired me and trained me how to do this. And it worked well for a couple years. But when I ended up losing that job, I was making $30 an hour. It was decent money, and I was hoping to get that again. So for 6 months after I got out of Coatesville, I'm collecting unemployment. I'm looking for work. I'm not able to find it. Eventually, I decide I guess I'll go back to waiting tables in the interim, right? Because I did that before I joined the Army. And I remembered it being, decent money, but not a thing I really liked doing. Um, it was different this time because I was in my head all the time and because I was so isolated. My ex-wife worked to keep me uneven and to keep me isolated. And she had me convinced that I was a bad person. And that didn't take much because I felt like a bad person because of what I'd done in Iraq, right? My belief, and I didn't know how to enunciate it then, but over the years, intentions are important, intentions are great. But you ever heard somebody talk about somebody's in a bad relationship and they say, "Oh no, you don't know what he's like deep down. Deep down, they're a good person."
Mm.
I don't think that exists. I don't think I don't think being a good person deep down is a real thing. I think that a person, myself, all I am is what I think, what I say, and what I do, right? And what I do is more important than what I say, and what I say is more important than what I think. They all feed each other. But if you do bad things, it kind of necessarily means that you're a bad person, at least in part, right? So I had this negative image of myself that I thought I was a bad person because I had done bad things, and she reinforced that to keep me isolated and to keep me in that relationship. When I started waiting tables again, one, now I'm moving around again, right? And it was hard because I'm 370 pounds at this point. My knees and ankles were shot from being in the army. When I first started waiting tables again, it hurt. I was in physical pain all the time. But I'm moving around, I'm walking all day, and I'm around people all day. Customers, mostly coworkers though. And what I started to learn pretty quickly was that people liked me. People enjoyed having me around. People liked talking to me, and I liked being around people. I had it in my head that I was like a hermit, a misanthrope. I didn't want to be around anybody. And I started to slowly learn that it wasn't that I didn't want to be around anybody, it was that I wasn't happy in my marriage. I wasn't happy in that relationship. Um, so I'm working this job in a corporate chain restaurant, nothing special, but I ended up meeting some really extraordinary people. And I start talking to people and I start spending a lot more time at the restaurant. And I start volunteering for double shifts. One, because I need the money, but like I would come in for lunch and lunch was busy until like 1 o'clock and then it was pretty much over. They would cut me like, okay, yeah, you're good. Come back at 5. I would just stay there. I would go to a table in the back and I would put on my headphones and I would draw for hours, right? Rather than going back home because I didn't want to be home. And then after the service was over at night, I would hang out in the parking lot talking with somebody for a half hour, 45 minutes. And then eventually I would go home. And I started realizing that some of the things that my ex-wife would say about me and would try to reinforce in me were not really accurate, and that I did have value, and that other people did like me. And over the course of years, I realized that I didn't want to be. I always knew I didn't want to be in the relationship. The first 6 weeks were fine, but I didn't really think. I had always been taught that you stick it out, you make it work, right? And the analogy I had in my head is that you're in a relationship, you're in a canoe, right? And you're paddling along, and it's going to be rough sometimes, and it's going to be choppy, and it's going to be scary sometimes. But eventually, you're going to find a place where you can pull off to the side and set up camp, and things will be okay. And I really thought I could make it work. I really thought that there was something I could do where she wouldn't be so afraid all the time, she wouldn't be so angry, and we could make things work. And that wasn't true.
How did you get unstuck though? Because once you realized who you were, then you could dispense with the relationship, which is what you did.
Well, so what I realized was that if I wanted things to be different, I had to do different things. And it started involuntarily. Getting this job was not a thing I wanted to do. So now I'm doing things different and I'm seeing results. There was a woman I worked with that I got pretty close with, who we talked a lot. And I thought for a second, maybe there's something here. But that helped a lot. Another thing that helped was we started doing couples counseling. Um, I had my therapy, obviously my individual therapist through the VA. And I guess it was 2014, 2015. We had a fight, and I told her I didn't want to do the marriage anymore. And I went back to my parents' house. And it only lasted like 2 days because I was inertia. I didn't know how to be without her. being at my parents' house, I was isolated, and they live in the country. They live out in the middle of nowhere. So I came back because she agreed to do couples counseling. And when I went into the counselor, I said, "Look, I'm willing to do this because if it can be fixed, I'd like to fix it, but I'm looking for the door. I don't think that this relationship works, and this is like the last ditch attempt." After about 3 months, it was suggested I was out of therapy with the VA. VA therapists move around a lot, and I wasn't going. They offered to give me individual counseling. So our couples therapist had a partner in their office, uh, and Anna was her name. They're like, "Why don't you meet with Anna once a week, and you can have your own individual therapy?" And my ex was all aboard that because in her head, the problem's all me, right? So if I go to therapy, we'll fix it. So I start working with Anna, and what I didn't realize was that they were kind of comparing notes between the couple session and my individual session, and they were looking to help me because my ex-wife had borderline personality disorder, which can make things difficult, and I just wasn't into it anymore. So after a couple months of that, I had gotten to a point where the stuff that had happened with my ex-wife, it wasn't her fault, right? She didn't ask for it. She didn't cause any of the abuse she suffered, but it wasn't my fault either. And I wasn't responsible, and I wasn't able to help her, and I was drowning. So I decided to leave. Um, and that was a tumultuous process. There was the police got involved. Uh, she made things very difficult,
Mm-hmm.
but we went our separate ways. And then I was terrified again because now I'm alone, and I
Mm-hmm.
realized that I'd never been alone. I I'm 44 now. I've lived alone for 6 months my entire life. I was
Mm-hmm.
with my family, and then I was in college, and I had roommates, and then I was in the army, and I was living in the barracks, and then I was married. And now I'm in this house by myself, just me and the dog. Uh, it became more apparent that I want to be around people. Now that I had time, I was able to take control of my life. I decided to change my eating habits. I decided to get back in the gym, and that was rough. You know, I was very self-conscious. I was 36. I was overweight, and I'm trying to be in the gym, and I'm sweating and working. But it turned out I liked it, and I just kept doing it, and kept doing it. Um, I ended up. I had a three-bedroom house, and I rented out a couple of the rooms to some people I worked with. Great people. I'm still super close with Lindsay. She's an amazing young woman, one of my best friends. She was a climber. She was at one point like a semi-pro, like sponsored climber when she was younger. So we started going to a local rock gym, and I took to that, and that's a great workout, and it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. So I'm making changes.
How did you get to the point where you could allow yourself to be happy? I feel like I'm missing is that point where you said, I accept what's happened in my life in this
So that has
service.
come more recently. What I had gotten to when I when I ended my relationship, there was a period of just elation, right? Like I'm free, and all this stuff isn't weighing on me right now. I wasn't really thinking about it so much. Um, One of the biggest things when I went back to college as an adult after service, I had a professor who the first class I took with him was called Americans in the World, and it was about American colonialism and the American national character and how our perception differs from the perception of others. And we were talking about Iraq, and he said that any death that occurred in Iraq after 2004 was, in a very real sense, a murder. And I took issue with that, right? Because a hit dog's gonna holler, right? Um, I pushed back, and he pushed back. And Dr. Alchin became one of my closest friends, and we really started talking about this. And he introduced me to why can I not remember his name? He just recently passed away. Hugh, no, this I have sometimes my memory's not so sharp. You're
Right.
familiar with the My massacre, right?
No.
Okay, so in My, the Americal division burned and like slaughtered and raped this whole village of My in Vietnam,
Okay.
and it was stopped by a reconnaissance helicopter pilot. Hugh Thompson was the pilot, Glenn Andretti was the gunner, and Guy. No, I can't remember the third guy's name. I met the third guy through Guy Alchin, um, and he talked to me about his experience, and he talked to me about how they saw this thing going on from the air. They knew it was wrong. They saw a group of women and children move into this like bunker, and there were soldiers coming towards them. They landed this helicopter, this little tiny unarmored recon helicopter. They landed between the U.S. troops and these Vietnamese civilians. And Hugh Thompson said, "Hey, let me. You guys need to. This has gone on too far. Let me try. There's women and children there. Let me try to get them out." And this American troop reportedly said, "Oh, I got a way to get them out." And he pulled out a hand grenade. And Hugh said, "This is done. Find me your commander. Get on the mic. Stand down. You guys are done." And the gunner, the guy, the man I knew, and I'm really upset that I can't remember his name right now. He was instructed to open fire on the U.S. troops if they didn't follow his pilot's commands, because this massacre was going to end. And this was a huge story. The Army tried to cover it up, but he talked about how they looked at it, they knew it was wrong, and they decided to stop it. They decided to act. And I remember the times that I saw stuff that I knew was wrong that I just went along with. And that's when I learned about the concept of moral injury. Moral injury lives right next door to PTSD, but it's basically uh, it's what happens when you repeatedly go against your moral compass. It's profound cognitive dissonance. It's what I when I would talk to students, I would talk to groups, and one of the things I would think about is I would ask the audience to hold in their head the thing they've done in their life that they're most ashamed of, the worst thing they've ever done. Don't share it with me. Don't share. I just want you to think about it for a second. How do you react if after you've done that, you're clapped on the back, told what a good job you've done, and then they pin a medal on your chest for this? You know, what do you do with that? Where do you go from that? That's what I was dealing with. Um, and I started looking into it more. And I ended up eventually in a moral injury group at the VA where we talked about this. We talked about what moral injury was, how it affects you, and how to move past it. And one of the things that we in the group that we're very open with is that, doing this work, it's not going to take the pain away. The pain is a natural, and the pain exists because you aren't a terrible person. You've done something wrong and you feel bad about it. And where do we put that? How do we focus that energy? You're going to move forward, right? You're going to wake up tomorrow, and if you're going to wake up tomorrow, how are you going to do it? What are you going to do with that day, right? So what I had to accept, I'm never going to take it back, right? I can't undo any of the things I did. I participated in what I think is a moral evil. I think the invasion and occupation of Iraq is morally unjustifiable. The we had a severe negative impact on a lot of people's actual lives. What I had to do was realize that I have that responsibility. I did that, but I can't change it. I can't make it better, but I can control what I do today, and I can control what I do tomorrow. Um, and it seems trite, maybe, but there's value in that. So I live my life now. Uh, if I had one wish, it would be that I never have to hurt anybody ever again. I don't want to take from anybody. Um, if you're not hurting somebody or yourself, it is my job to help or get out of the way. And that's what I do. Um,
It sounds like you live your life now like in service to your fellow human beings.
yeah, well, yes. I mean, and it's there's not we started this. You talked about ostracism and how cruel it
Mm-hmm.
is, right? So for most of human history, the worst thing that could happen to you was to find yourself by yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am I'm not an individualist, right? I believe that nothing, no human being, no single human being in history has ever achieved anything of consequence on their own. Everything is a group effort, right? From our survival, we are, as animals go, relatively weak. Our senses are relatively dull. We don't have strong jaws. We don't have thick skin. We don't have, big scary claws, but we're the apex. We are all over this planet everywhere.
Because
Why?
we cooperate.
Because we cooperate, because we work together, because maybe maybe I'm not so strong, but maybe I'm really good at identifying patterns. Maybe you're not great at identifying patterns, but you're real strong. Together, we have a better choice. We have a better chance. A division of labor, helping each other out. Let's get more modern, right? Da Vinci, whatever great artist you can think of, yes, that person came up with those ideas and executed them, but Da Vinci didn't raise the horses that provided the hair for his brushes. He didn't plant or fell the trees that gave the wood. He didn't weave his canvases, right? It's a team effort. We trade with each other, we help each other out, we work better in community. So it makes me feel good. When I do good, I feel good. When I'm helping people out, that helps me out. It's not selfless, but I acknowledge that I do better when the people around me are doing better. I am happier when the people around me are happy. So I'm going to work for that to the extent that I can. And I don't have a lot to offer. Like I'm not. When we spoke beforehand, you asked if I had seen any episodes of your podcast. Like, yeah, I have. It's a little weird that you want to have me on. I'm not a CEO or a champion. I haven't. I feel pretty successful, but not that way. Like I'm not a titan of industry, but I have enough, right? I'm able to take care of myself. I'm able to provide for my little family here, uh, but I'm happy
Hmm.
most of the time, and that I'm happy because I realize, I am responsible for what I'm responsible for. I am responsible for what I did, for what I've done, and what I'm gonna do. And it hasn't always been. I haven't always made the right decisions. I haven't always done the best things, and I could beat myself up about it. I could be an aesthetic. I could put on a hair shirt and I could walk around flogging myself, but that's not going to help any of the people I hurt. That's not going to.
Well, I feel like your story is everyone's story. Clearly, you've had experiences that are different, having seen active duty and so on and so forth. But everyone has a cross to bear, and
Absolutely.
everyone has the option of doing something. A lot of people don't know what to do to to try to be happy, and that's problematic. you made some observations, you've had some counseling, you've I don't even like the term risen above because I feel like we never really rise above stuff. We accept it, at least in
Right.
my case. In my case, whatever I've done, I've done. I try not to assign value to it at this point. It just is.
Yeah,
And I have the option of being happy.
that you have the option. Um,
That to
so
me is your story, and that to me is interesting. Whether you're a CEO or a gold medalist,
right,
I mean, that's interesting too, but
for sure.
I think you're interesting for a lot of different reasons.
Thank you.
Fascinating.
It's I have had experiences that not everybody's had. That's true of everyone, right?
Sure.
There's 8 billion people on this planet. If you were to find the person most different from you, like you have the person most distinct from you with different ideas, opposite ideas, you still have more in common with that person than the things that separate you. People are people, and everybody's worst day is their worst day. So for me, honesty, honesty with other people, honesty with myself has been necessary. When I was miserable, when I was at my most depressed, I was lying to everyone. I was lying about my happiness. I was lying about the state of my relationship. I was lying about the state of my finances. I was lying about my home life. I was being guarded. I wasn't letting people in. I wasn't honestly interacting with reality. I was sending out a representative trying to uh, anticipate what I thought other people would want to hear and trying to manage my appearance so that it didn't seem like everything was falling apart when everything was falling apart.
Mm.
Now I am maybe too open sometimes. Maybe I have a tendency to overshare, and I work to correct on that too. But the people that I'm close with, the people that matter to me, I'm not. I'm going to be who I am, and I don't use the term brutally honest because you don't have to be brutal to be honest, right? I want people to have as clear a picture of me as possible. I don't want people to have to guess how I'm feeling or how I feel about them. I want everybody. If I don't like a person and that person doesn't know it, then I've done something wrong, right? If I love a person and that person doesn't know it, I've done something very wrong. Um, so therapy was essential. I didn't have the tools when they told me that hey, you're probably autistic. I really feel like you're on the autism spectrum. Let's do the diagnosis, right? I resisted it because I didn't want to be labeled and I didn't want to be othered. But once I thought about it, and once they explained to me what it was and what it meant, I was like, oh, this explains a lot of the problems I had when I was younger. This explains my difficulties with relationships when I was younger. This explains why I get so amped up. Um, Having the tools and having the language just to describe why you're upset, why you're unhappy, helps a lot. Um, and then not comparing myself to other people more than I
Mm.
have to, right? Um,
Ever.
yeah, I'm not.
The comparing mind is the killer of happiness. At
It
least
can,
that's what the Buddhists say. I'm
yeah.
just telling I'm just repeating what the Buddhists say.
Well, it's and the reason we repeat it is because they're onto something.
I
It
think so.
resonates with people.
Well, is there anything like that you feel like people should know about you in addition to what we've talked about? Like, I like to say that the most important punctuation is the hyphen. It's what's
Mhm.
between your date of birth and your date of death.
Right.
What would you want people to know about you after you're gone?
Um, I mean, I guess the first thing is I'm sorry. Uh, I I made decisions that subsequently cost other people a lot. Uh, Cost people their lives, cost people their livelihoods, cost people their sense of security. Um, I have done a lot of harm in my life, and I acknowledge it, and I wish it was otherwise. Um, I'm very comfortable though with not having a legacy. I don't. I'm not going to be remembered long after I die. I don't have kids. I'm not. That's not in my future. Um, so once I die, it'll just be my friends and my peers that have memory of me. And then once they die, that's it.
But I feel like, in spite of that which you are sorry for, you decided at some point that you wanted to do good. And I feel like, not knowing you well, but still knowing you, I feel like you've done a lot of good. And I would think, for the brief amount of time you may be remembered,
Yeah,
that might be part of it.
I think working with the moral injury program, um, my time talking to students about, you know, my talk, I like subtitled it "The American Way of War: Why We Fight, How We Fight, and Why You Shouldn't Participate."
Mm.
Um, if I've had a positive impact on a dozen people in my life, that's a significant impact, right? That can move out, and those people, maybe they can have a positive impact on somebody else. Um, I would just, I wish more people would take the chance to to make a change, right? So often we're just on autopilot. A lot of people, you know, the jobs they do, they work where they work because they got hired there. They live where they live because that's where they live. You know, um, I would encourage people to live an examined life, to think about your choices and realize that you have more than you think sometimes. Um,
And I feel like people will do that just listening to you. And I feel like that's part of your legacy, even though I believe, as you do, for example, I can't remember who won the Super Bowl 3 years ago. And
right,
I would think that's more memorable than anything I might have done in my life. People may remember me for a generation, but after that, it's pretty much over. But in my opinion, what's really valuable is to be present with another human being when I'm present with the other human being. And you seem
absolutely,
to me to be very good at that. And I would think that in the moment, you're doing that on a regular basis. And I can't say what one should want to be remembered for, but I'm
right, right.
guessing. I'm guessing that's, even though you haven't said it, I'm guessing that's, you're proud of the work that you've done with the
I'm
moral
proud of the work
injury
that I've done,
program and others.
and I'm proud that the people in my life, they know I love them. You know, uh, I don't use that phrase willy nilly, but like my friends, it's a small, pretty tight knit group, and people come and go, but it's that's when I'm at my happiest is when I'm with a group of other people, and like that's why I like the concept of your show. I like
Mm-hmm.
interesting people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it's all about. It is forming connections, being present, being mindful, thinking about the future, but not letting it. It's not here yet. You got to be in the moment, aware of the future, make some plans. Don't have some compassion for your future self, and don't get stuck in the past. The past happened. It's there. It's prologue. It's the foundation, but you can't change it. And
Well, acceptance again. You
acceptance.
got to that point. So I think we'll leave it at that.
That's
Thank
it.
you so much for
Thank you. I
your
appreciate the
time,
opportunity.
and I will see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Good job, Pat.
All righty. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye bye. If you enjoy the most fascinating podcast in the world, please follow on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow on Apple Podcast.